The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Kensington Palace as Prince Alexander stood at his study window, watching the gardeners tend to the rose gardens below. At 34, he had grown accustomed to the rhythms of royal life, but lately something felt different. His wife of 3 years, Princess Isabella, had been distant, distracted in ways that made him question everything he thought he knew about their marriage. Alexander turned from the window as his private secretary, James Morrison, entered with the morning briefings. The older man's usually composed expression carried a hint of concern that immediately caught the prince's attention. "Your Highness, there's been a development regarding the charity gala preparations," James began carefully. "Some information has come to light that you might find concerning." The prince settled into his leather chair, gesturing for James to continue. Over the years, he had learned to read between the lines of diplomatic language. When James used words like concerning, it usually meant something significant was brewing beneath the surface. "It's about Princess Isabella's background, sir. Specifically, her involvement with certain social establishments before your marriage." James placed a manila folder on the mahogany desk between them. "A journalist has been asking questions about her frequent visits to exclusive private clubs during her time in London." Alexander felt his chest tighten. Isabella had always been somewhat mysterious about her past, claiming she preferred to focus on their future together rather than dwelling on what came before. He had respected that boundary, perhaps too much. Now, as he stared at the unopened folder, he wondered if his trust had been misplaced. "What kind of establishments?" Alexander asked, though he wasn't certain he wanted to know the answer. "Private members' clubs, sir. The type that cater to very specific clientele. Places where discretion is valued above all else, and where connections are made through unconventional means." James paused, choosing his words carefully. "The journalist claims to have photographs and witness statements." The prince's mind raced back to their courtship. Isabella had been working as a cultural consultant when they met at a museum fundraiser. She was intelligent, articulate, and possessed a worldliness that had immediately attracted him. Her American background had been refreshing after years of dating within the narrow circles of European nobility. She had seemed genuine, uninterested in his title or wealth, focused instead on making a difference through humanitarian work. "Where did this information come from?" Alexander asked, opening the folder with reluctant curiosity. "A former employee of one of these clubs came forward. Apparently, Princess Isabella was not just a member but held some sort of privileged status." "The details are..." James hesitated. "They're quite specific, Your Highness." Alexander studied the photographs spread before him. They showed Isabella entering and leaving what appeared to be an upscale townhouse in Mayfair. The images were clearly taken over several months, showing her arriving at different times of day, often staying for hours. What struck him most was her appearance in the photos, confident, purposeful, as if she belonged there. "This establishment," Alexander said, pointing to the building in the photographs, "what exactly goes on there?" "It's called the Meridian Club, sir. Officially, it's described as a networking venue for international professionals. Unofficially, it's known as a place where wealthy individuals can arrange companionship. The type of companionship that comes with absolute discretion and significant financial compensation." The words hit Alexander like physical blows. He set the photographs aside, struggling to reconcile the woman he had married with the implications of what James was telling him. Isabella, his Isabella, had been involved in something that sounded dangerously close to an escort service. "Are you suggesting that my wife was..." He couldn't bring himself to finish the sentence. "I'm not suggesting anything, Your Highness. I'm simply presenting you with information that others may soon make public. How you choose to interpret or act upon it is entirely your decision." Alexander stood and walked to the window again, this time seeing nothing of the gardens below. His thoughts were consumed with memories of their relationship. Had there been signs he had missed? Moments when Isabella's behavior or knowledge seemed inconsistent with the background she had shared with him? He remembered their honeymoon in Tuscany, when she had demonstrated an unexplained familiarity with luxury that seemed to go beyond mere good taste. She knew exactly how to interact with the most exclusive hotel staff, understood the unspoken rules of high-end establishments, and possessed a social grace that he had attributed to natural intelligence rather than learned experience. "What does this person want?" Alexander asked, turning back to face James. "The former employee who came forward." "Money, sir." They're shopping the story to various publications. So far, the palace's relationship with the press has kept it contained, but that won't last indefinitely. Especially if more people come forward with similar information. Alexander felt the walls of his carefully constructed world beginning to shift. His marriage to Isabella had been more than a personal choice, it had been a strategic alliance that brought positive attention to the monarchy. Her background as an accomplished American had helped modernize the royal family's image. If these allegations became public, the scandal could damage not just their marriage but the institution itself. "I need to speak with Isabella," Alexander said finally. "Before I make any decisions about how to handle this, I need to hear her side of the story." "Of course, Your Highness. However, I should mention that Princess Isabella is currently at her private apartment in the city. She's been spending increasing amounts of time there lately, claiming she needs space to work on her charitable foundation." Alexander found this information troubling. Isabella's retreat to her private residence had begun several months ago, around the time she claimed to be developing new international partnerships for her humanitarian work. Now he wondered if there were other reasons for her desire for privacy. "Schedule a meeting with her for this evening," Alexander instructed. "Somewhere private where we can speak without interruption." As James prepared to leave, Alexander called him back. "James, I need you to conduct a thorough but discreet investigation into Princess Isabella's activities before our marriage. I want to know everything: where she worked, who she associated with, how she supported herself. Leave no detail unexplored." "Already in progress, sir." "I anticipated you would want comprehensive information." After James left, Alexander remained alone in his study, staring at the photographs spread across his desk. Each image seemed to tell a story he had never heard, revealing a version of his wife that was completely unknown to him. The woman in these pictures moved through an exclusive world with the confidence of someone who belonged there, who understood its rules and expectations. He picked up one particular photograph that showed Isabella emerging from the Meridian Club in an elegant evening dress, her expression satisfied and purposeful. This was not the uncertain cultural consultant he had met at the museum fundraiser. This was someone else entirely, someone who knew exactly what she was doing and why. The prince's phone buzzed with a text message from Isabella: "Working late tonight on the foundation proposals. Won't be home for dinner. Love you." Alexander stared at the message, wondering if it was true or if it was another carefully constructed lie. How many other messages had been deceptions? How many times had she claimed to be working late while actually engaging in activities she couldn't share with her husband? He thought about their last conversation, just 3 days ago, when she had excitedly described a potential partnership with an international relief organization. Her enthusiasm had seemed genuine, her knowledge of humanitarian issues impressive. But now he wondered if her expertise came from legitimate experience or from connections made through entirely different circumstances. The afternoon passed slowly as Alexander struggled to focus on his official duties. During a meeting with his economic advisors, he found himself analyzing everything Isabella had ever told him about her past, looking for inconsistencies or gaps that might now make sense in light of this new information. She had always been vague about how she had afforded her lifestyle before their marriage. When pressed, she would mention consulting work and family support, but never provided specific details. He had attributed her reluctance to discuss finances to American sensibilities about privacy, but perhaps there had been more deliberate reasons for her evasiveness. As evening approached, Alexander prepared for what might be the most important conversation of his marriage. He had built his life on principles of honor and integrity, values that had been instilled in him from childhood. If these allegations were true, it would force him to reconsider not just his relationship with Isabella, but his own judgment and ability to protect the monarchy from scandal. The photographs remained spread across his desk as the sun set outside his office windows. Each image represented a piece of a puzzle he had never known existed, revealing a picture of his wife that challenged everything he believed about their relationship. Whatever conversation awaited him that evening would determine not only the future of his marriage, but the direction of his life as a member of the royal family. Alexander closed the folder and locked it in his desk drawer, but the images remained burned into his memory. The woman he had married might be someone entirely different from who he thought she was, and the implications of that possibility would reshape everything he understood about love, trust, and the responsibilities that came with his royal position. As he prepared to leave his office, one question dominated his thoughts: how could someone he loved and trusted so completely have hidden such a significant part of their past? The answer, he realized, might be more complicated and painful than he was prepared to handle. The palace corridors felt longer than usual as he walked toward his private quarters, knowing that within hours, his carefully ordered world might be forever changed by the truth about the woman who shared his name and his crown. The drive to Isabella's private apartment felt endless, though it lasted only 30 minutes through London's evening traffic. Prince Alexander sat in the back seat of the unmarked vehicle, his mind replaying every moment of their 3-year marriage, searching for clues he might have missed. The folder containing the photographs rested beside him, a weight that seemed to grow heavier with each passing mile. Isabella's apartment was located in an exclusive district of Mayfair, a space she had maintained even after their marriage. She claimed it served as her office for foundation work and a retreat when royal duties became overwhelming. Alexander had always respected her need for independence, viewing it as a healthy aspect of their modern royal marriage. Now that independence felt suspicious, calculated. The building's doorman recognized the prince immediately, though discretion was clearly part of his training. Alexander was escorted to the private elevator that led directly to Isabella's penthouse. As the floors passed, he wondered how many times his wife had made this same journey while keeping secrets that could destroy their marriage. Isabella answered the door wearing casual clothes, designer jeans and a silk blouse that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Even in simple attire, she possessed the effortless elegance that had first attracted him. Her smile was warm and genuine as she greeted him with a kiss, acting as if his unexpected visit was a pleasant surprise rather than the confrontation it would soon become. "Alexander, what a wonderful surprise," she said, leading him into the spacious living room. The apartment was decorated with impeccable taste, filled with art and furniture that spoke of sophisticated preferences and substantial resources. "I was just finishing up some paperwork for the Refugee Education Initiative." Alexander noticed several documents spread across the coffee table, all bearing official letterheads from legitimate humanitarian organizations. Either Isabella was genuinely committed to charitable work, or she had become exceptionally skilled at creating convincing cover stories for her activities. "Isabella, we need to talk," he said, settling into one of the leather armchairs. "About your past." Something flickered across her expression, so briefly that he almost missed it. Fear, perhaps, or recognition that this moment had always been inevitable. But, within seconds, her composed mask was back in place, the same serene confidence she displayed at official functions. "What about my past?" she asked, taking the seat across from him. "You know I prefer to focus on our future rather than dwelling on what came before." "That's exactly the problem," Alexander replied, placing the folder on the table between them. "I've learned some things about your activities before we met. Things that you never shared with me." Isabella's eyes fixed on the folder, but her expression remained neutral. Years of practice at hiding her true thoughts and feelings had served her well, Alexander realized. Even now, facing potential exposure, she maintained the same calm demeanor that had made her such an asset at royal functions. "What kind of things?" she asked, though her voice carried a note of caution that hadn't been there moments before. Alexander opened the folder and spread several photographs across the coffee table. Isabella studied them without apparent emotion, as if she were reviewing images of strangers rather than documentation of her own activities. "The Meridian Club," Alexander said simply. "Care to explain what you were doing there? And, please don't tell me it was cultural consulting work." Isabella was quiet for a long moment, her fingers drumming silently against the arm of her chair. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady but different, stripped of the careful modulation she typically used in their conversations. "I wondered when this would surface," she said. 3 years is longer than I expected it to stay buried." The admission hit Alexander like a physical blow. He had hoped, despite the evidence, that there might be an innocent explanation. Her matter-of-fact tone suggested otherwise. "So it's true," he said. "You were involved with this establishment." "Involved is a rather vague term," Isabella replied, meeting his eyes directly for the first time since seeing the photographs. "Yes, I spent time at the Meridian Club. Yes, I had relationships with wealthy men who could afford to compensate me for my companionship. No, it wasn't prostitution in the crude sense that you're probably imagining." Alexander felt his world tilt further off its axis. Even hearing the truth directly from Isabella didn't make it easier to process. The woman he had married, the princess who represented the monarchy at official functions, had essentially been a high-class escort. "How is that different from prostitution?" he asked, struggling to keep his voice level. Because it wasn't just about sex, Isabella said, her tone becoming more animated as she explained. The Meridian Club specialized in sophisticated companionship. Yes, intimate relationships were often part of the arrangement, but so was intellectual conversation, social accompaniment to important events, and genuine emotional connection. The men who frequented the club weren't looking for quick transactions, they wanted relationships with intelligent, cultured women who could enhance their lives in multiple ways. Alexander studied his wife's face as she spoke, noting how different she seemed when discussing this chapter of her past. Gone was the careful uncertainty she often displayed when talking about her pre-marriage life. This Isabella spoke with authority and confidence, as if she were describing a legitimate career rather than what most people would consider scandalous behavior. "And the money?" he asked. "How much were you paid for this companionship?" "Enough to live very well," Isabella admitted. "Enough to afford this apartment, designer clothes, international travel. Enough to move in the same circles where I would eventually meet you." The implications of her words struck Alexander immediately. Their meeting at the museum fundraiser hadn't been coincidental. Isabella had been able to attend that exclusive event because her work at the Meridian Club had provided her with the financial means and social connections to access high society. "Did you target me specifically?" he asked, dreading the answer. Isabella shook her head. "No, Alexander. My feelings for you were genuine from the moment we met. But I won't lie to you about how I was able to be in that room, wearing that dress, with the confidence to approach a prince. All of that came from my experiences at the club." Alexander walked to the window, looking out at the London skyline as he tried to process everything Isabella had told him. Part of him appreciated her honesty now that the truth was out, but another part felt betrayed by years of deception. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked without turning around. "Before we got married, when things became serious between us, why didn't you trust me enough to share this?" "Because I knew how you would react," Isabella said quietly. "Exactly how you're reacting now. With disgust, disappointment, and judgment. I fell in love with you, Alexander, but I also knew that my past would make our relationship impossible if you knew the truth." Alexander turned back to face her. "So you chose to lie instead." "I chose to protect what we had," Isabella corrected. "Every relationship requires some level of privacy about past experiences. I simply kept more private than most people do." "This isn't about privacy, Isabella. This is about deception on a fundamental level. Do you understand what this could do to the monarchy if it becomes public? The scandal would be enormous." For the first time, Isabella's composed facade cracked slightly. "Do you think I haven't considered that every single day for the past 3 years? Do you think I don't understand what's at stake?" Alexander sat back down, studying his wife with new eyes. "Is that why you've been spending so much time here lately? Are you still involved with the club?" "No," Isabella said firmly. "I left that life completely when we became engaged. The apartment serves exactly the purpose I've told you, it's my workspace and retreat. But you're right that I've been avoiding the palace lately." "Why?" "Because I've been waiting for this conversation to happen. Someone contacted me 3 weeks ago, claiming to have information about my past and threatening to go to the press unless I paid them. I've been trying to handle it quietly, hoping to protect you and the royal family from scandal." Alexander felt a new surge of anger, this time directed not just at Isabella but at the situation itself. "Blackmail? Someone has been blackmailing you and you didn't tell me? What would you have done?" Isabella challenged. "Pay them?" That would only have confirmed that the information was damaging and invited more demands. "Involve palace security?" That would have meant explaining everything to more people, increasing the risk of exposure. Alexander had to admit that her reasoning made sense, even if he disagreed with her decision to handle it alone. "What did you do?" "Nothing," Isabella said. "I ignored their demands, hoping they would move on to easier targets. Obviously, that strategy failed." Alexander picked up one of the photographs again, this time looking at it with the context Isabella had provided. She looked confident and comfortable in the image, but now he could also see something else, a calculation behind her eyes that suggested she was always aware of being watched and judged. "The men at the club," he said. "Did you have feelings for any of them?" Isabella was quiet for a moment before answering. "Some of them, yes. But nothing like what I feel for you." Those relationships were ultimately transactional, even when genuine affection was involved. What we have is different. How can I believe that? Alexander asked. How can I trust anything you tell me now? Because I'm telling you the truth now, when I could have continued lying, Isabella replied. Because I've had 3 years to find a wealthy man to leave you for, and I'm still here. Because despite everything you've learned tonight, you're still the person I want to share my life with. Alexander stood and walked to the window again, needing distance to think clearly. Outside, London continued its evening rhythm, unaware that a royal marriage was being dissected in a Mayfair apartment. The normalcy of the street scene below contrasted sharply with the surreal nature of their conversation. There's something else, Isabella said from behind him. Something you should know before you decide what to do with this information. Alexander turned, dreading what new revelation awaited him. I'm pregnant, Isabella said simply. The words hit Alexander like a thunderbolt. He stared at his wife, processing this latest piece of information that would complicate an already impossible situation. A child would change everything, not just for their marriage, but for the line of succession and the future of the monarchy. How long have you known? He asked. 2 weeks. I was planning to tell you this weekend, after the charity gala. I wanted to choose the right moment, make it special. Isabella's voice carried a note of sadness. I certainly didn't plan for it to come out during this conversation. Alexander sank back into his chair, overwhelmed by the cascade of revelations that had upended his understanding of his life. His wife had hidden a scandalous past, was being blackmailed, and was now pregnant with what could be the future heir to the throne. Each piece of information seemed designed to make his situation more complicated and his choices more limited. Is the child mine? He asked, the question escaping before he could consider whether he really wanted to know the answer. Isabella's expression hardened. Of course it's yours. Whatever you think of my past, I've been faithful to our marriage vows. Completely faithful. Alexander believed her, though he realized his ability to judge Isabella's truthfulness had been severely compromised by the evening's revelations. The woman he thought he knew had been largely fictional, a carefully constructed persona designed to win his love and secure her position in royal society. As they sat in silence, both lost in their own thoughts, Alexander realized that the conversation had raised more questions than it had answered. Isabella's honesty about her past, while painful, had also revealed a complexity to their relationship that he had never considered. The challenge now was determining whether their marriage could survive such fundamental deceptions, and whether the monarchy could weather the scandal that seemed increasingly inevitable. The clock on the mantel chimed 10 times, marking not just the hour but the end of their old relationship and the beginning of something entirely different, something neither of them yet understood or could predict. The silence in Isabella's apartment stretched between them like a chasm that seemed impossible to bridge. Prince Alexander sat motionless, staring at his hands while processing the twin revelations that had shattered his understanding of his marriage. His wife had been essentially an escort, and now she was carrying what could be the future heir to the throne. The weight of these facts pressed down on him with crushing intensity. Isabella remained curled in her chair, watching Alexander with an expression that mixed hope and resignation. She had finally told the truth about her past, but the relief she might have expected was overshadowed by uncertainty about their future. The pregnancy, which should have been a joyful announcement, now felt like another complication in an already impossible situation. I need to ask you something, Alexander said finally, breaking the oppressive quiet. And I need you to be completely honest with me. Isabella nodded, though her posture suggested she was bracing for another difficult question. During your time at the Meridian Club, did you meet any politicians? Anyone in government, military leadership, or other royal families? The question clearly surprised Isabella. She had expected him to ask more about their relationship or the pregnancy, not about the broader implications of her past associations. Why does that matter? She asked. Because if this becomes public, I need to understand the full scope of potential damage, Alexander replied. If you had relationships with people in sensitive positions, it could create security concerns beyond just personal scandal. Isabella was quiet for several moments, clearly considering how much to reveal. There were a few government ministers, some military contractors, a couple of foreign diplomats. The club was very discreet about client confidentiality, but, yes, some high-profile individuals frequented the establishment. Alexander felt his heart sink further. The implications of Isabella's connections extended far beyond their marriage into matters of national security and international relations. If any of those relationships became public, it could compromise sensitive information or create diplomatic incidents. Did any of them know about our relationship when it began? He asked. Not from me, Isabella said firmly. I was very careful to keep my professional life completely separate from my personal feelings for you. But I can't control what conclusions people might have drawn when news of our engagement became public. Alexander stood and began pacing the length of the living room, his mind racing through potential scenarios. If Isabella's former clients recognized her when their engagement was announced, they might have realized they had compromising information about a future member of the royal family. Such knowledge could be used for blackmail, political leverage, or worse. The person who contacted you 3 weeks ago, he said, stopping to face Isabella. Do you think it was one of your former clients? I don't know, Isabella admitted. They used an anonymous email address and never identified themselves directly. They could have been a client, an employee of the club, or someone who simply obtained information about my activities there. Alexander pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found the number for Sir Richard Pemberton, the head of royal security. The conversation they needed to have would be deeply personal and professionally devastating, but it could no longer be avoided. I'm calling security, he told Isabella. We need professional help to assess the situation and determine how to proceed. Alexander, wait, Isabella said, rising from her chair. Before you involve more people, can we talk about us? About our marriage and what happens next? Alexander paused with his finger hovering over the call button. Isabella was right that involving security would make their private crisis a professional matter, with protocols and procedures that might not account for their personal feelings. What is there to discuss? He asked. You lied to me about fundamental aspects of your past. Our entire relationship was built on deception. Our relationship was built on love, Isabella corrected, moving closer to him. Yes, I kept secrets about my past, but my feelings for you were always genuine. The woman you fell in love with wasn't a lie, she was who I became because of loving you. Alexander studied his wife's face, searching for signs of manipulation or calculation. But what he saw instead was vulnerability and pain that seemed too raw to be manufactured. The Isabella standing before him now was different from both the confident woman in the photographs and the carefully composed princess he thought he had married. How can I trust that? He asked. How can I believe anything you tell me when you've proven you're capable of such elaborate deception? Because I'm not deceiving you now, Isabella replied. For the first time since we met, I'm being completely honest about who I am and what I've done. If I were still trying to manipulate you, I would have found a way to deny everything or minimize it. Alexander wanted to believe her, but trust, once broken, was not easily repaired. The careful foundation of their marriage had been revealed as fundamentally flawed, built on lies and omissions that called into question every shared moment of their relationship. The pregnancy, he said. When did you find out? 2 weeks ago, like I told you. I took 3 different tests to be sure. Isabella placed her hand protectively over her still flat stomach. I know the timing is terrible, but this baby is a gift, Alexander. Something pure and good that comes from our love, regardless of what happens between us. Alexander felt torn between competing emotions. The prospect of becoming a father should have filled him with joy, but instead he felt trapped by circumstances beyond his control. A child would tie him to Isabella forever, regardless of whether their marriage survived this crisis. Have you seen a doctor? He asked. Yes, privately. Everything looks normal so far. I'm about 8 weeks along. Isabella hesitated before continuing. Alexander, I know you need time to process everything, but I need to know if you're going to leave me. The question hung in the air between them, carrying implications that extended far beyond their personal relationship. If Alexander divorced Isabella, especially during pregnancy, it would create a massive scandal regardless of the reasons. If he stayed with her and the truth about her past eventually emerged, it could damage the monarchy's reputation for generations. I don't know, Alexander answered honestly. I don't know what I'm going to do about our marriage, about the pregnancy, or about any of this. I need time to think. Isabella nodded, though her expression suggested she had hoped for a different response. I understand. But, while you're thinking, please remember that I never wanted to hurt you. Everything I did was to protect what we have together. Alexander's phone buzzed with an incoming text message. He glanced at the screen and saw a message from James Morrison, urgent. Another publication has contacted the palace about Princess Isabella's past. We need to meet immediately. The outside world was closing in on their private crisis, making personal resolutions more urgent and more complicated. Alexander showed Isabella the message, watching as her face went pale with understanding. It's happening, she said quietly. The story is going to break whether we're ready or not. Alexander made the decision he had been avoiding. He called Sir Richard Pemberton, knowing that once he involved royal security, their private crisis would become an institutional problem with political and diplomatic ramifications. Sir Richard, I need you to come to Princess Isabella's apartment immediately. We have a situation that requires your expertise. Alexander's voice was steady despite the turmoil he felt inside. Of course, Your Highness. Should I bring a full team? No, just yourself for now. This is a sensitive matter that requires discretion. Alexander ended the call and turned back to Isabella. He'll be here within the hour. Isabella sat back down, suddenly, looking smaller and more fragile than Alexander had ever seen her. The confident woman who had navigated high society and managed dangerous secrets now appeared overwhelmed by the consequences of her past catching up with her present. What will you tell him? She asked. The truth, Alexander replied. All of it. Sir Richard has handled sensitive situations before, and we're going to need his help to minimize the damage to the monarchy. And to our marriage? Alexander looked at his wife, seeing both the woman he had fallen in love with and the stranger whose past he was still discovering. I don't know if our marriage can survive this, Isabella. I honestly don't know. The next hour passed in tense silence as they waited for Sir Richard's arrival. Isabella made tea that neither of them drank, while Alexander stared out the window at the lights of London, wondering how many other secrets existed in the city below, and how many other lives were built on carefully constructed lies. When Sir Richard arrived, his expression was professionally neutral, but Alexander could see the concern in his eyes. As head of royal security, he had undoubtedly dealt with scandals before, but this situation presented unique challenges. Your Highness, Sir Richard said with a slight bow before turning to acknowledge Isabella. Your Royal Highness. Alexander gestured for him to sit down, then spent the next 30 minutes explaining everything Isabella's past at the Meridian Club, the blackmail attempts, the pregnancy, and the imminent threat of public exposure. Sir Richard listened without interruption, occasionally taking notes on a small pad. When Alexander finished, Sir Richard was quiet for several moments before responding. This is indeed a serious situation, he said finally. From a security standpoint, we need to immediately assess whether Princess Isabella's past associations pose any ongoing risks to the royal family or national security. What does that mean, practically speaking? Isabella asked. It means we need a complete list of everyone you had contact with during your time at this establishment, Sir Richard replied. We'll need to evaluate each individual for potential security concerns and determine whether any of them might be involved in the current blackmail attempts. Alexander watched Isabella's face as she processed this request. Providing such a list would mean revealing intimate details about relationships she had clearly hoped to keep buried. But, given the circumstances, there seemed to be no alternative. I can provide names, Isabella said slowly. But some of these men have families, legitimate careers, reputations to protect. I don't want to destroy innocent people's lives. Our primary concern is protecting the monarchy, Sir Richard replied diplomatically. However, we'll handle all information with appropriate discretion. As they discussed the practical steps needed to address the crisis, Alexander found himself watching Isabella with new attention. Even facing the destruction of everything she had built, she was concerned about protecting others who might be hurt by the revelations. It was either an admirable display of integrity or another calculated manipulation, and Alexander could no longer tell the difference. The conversation continued past midnight as they worked through scenarios and strategies. By the time Sir Richard left, they had a plan for damage control, but no clear resolution to the personal crisis that had started everything. Alexander and Isabella were left alone again, exhausted by hours of difficult conversations but no closer to understanding whether their marriage could survive the truth about her past. As Alexander prepared to leave and return to the palace, Isabella caught his arm. Whatever happens next, she said, I want you to know that loving you changed me. The person I am now, the person carrying your child, that's real, even if everything else was complicated. Alexander looked into her eyes, searching for the truth that had been so elusive throughout their marriage. What he saw was a woman who had lived multiple lives, made difficult choices, and was now facing the consequences of decisions made long before they met. Whether that woman deserved his forgiveness or his continued love remained an open question that would shape not only their future but the future of the monarchy itself. 3 weeks later, Prince Alexander stood in his private study at Kensington Palace, watching the morning news coverage that had dominated headlines across the globe. The story had broken exactly as Sir Richard Pemberton had predicted, with devastating thoroughness and international attention that showed no signs of diminishing. Royal scandal, Princess Isabella's secret past exposed, scrolled across every major news network, accompanied by carefully censored photographs and testimony from former Meridian Club employees. The coverage was relentless, dissecting every aspect of Isabella's pre-marriage life and speculating endlessly about the implications for the monarchy. Alexander turned off the television and walked to his desk, where 3 separate folders contained the work that had consumed his life for the past weeks. The first contained Sir Richard's security assessment, which had revealed 2 former clients of Isabella's who held sensitive government positions. The second held legal opinions about potential divorce proceedings and their constitutional implications. The third, which he had not yet opened, contained Isabella's complete written account of her past, prepared at the request of palace lawyers. The door opened without a knock, which meant only one person would dare enter so boldly. Queen Mother Elizabeth, Alexander's grandmother and the family matriarch, swept into the room with the authoritative presence that had guided the monarchy through 6 decades of scandals and triumphs. "Alexander," she said, settling into the chair across from his desk without invitation. "We need to discuss your situation and how it affects this institution we've spent generations protecting." Alexander had been dreading this conversation while simultaneously knowing it was inevitable. His grandmother's support had been crucial throughout his life, but he also knew she would prioritize the monarchy's welfare above any personal considerations. "Grandmother, I know what you're going to say," Alexander began, but she raised a hand to stop him. "I doubt that very much, dear boy. Sit down and listen." Her tone carried the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "I've reviewed all the information that's become available about Isabella's past, and I've consulted with constitutional experts about your options going forward." Alexander sat, feeling like a schoolboy being called before the headmaster despite being 34 years old and second in line to the throne. "The situation is certainly unfortunate," the Queen Mother continued, "but it's not unprecedented. This family has weathered far worse scandals than a princess with an unconventional background. What matters now is how we handle the aftermath." "I'm not sure our marriage can survive this," Alexander said. "The lies, the deception, the constant media attention. Isabella can barely leave the palace without facing hostile crowds and photographers." "Marriage is not about surviving individual crises," his grandmother replied sharply. "It's about building something larger than the sum of its parts." "Do you love Isabella?" The question caught Alexander off guard in its directness. "I thought I did. But how can I love someone I didn't really know?" "Because the person you fell in love with is real," the Queen Mother said. "Isabella's past may have been hidden, but her feelings for you are genuine. I've watched her for 3 years, Alexander. Whatever she did before meeting you, her commitment to this family and to you has been absolute." Alexander studied his grandmother's face, surprised by her defense of Isabella. He had expected moral judgment and demands for divorce proceedings, not support for preserving the marriage. "The baby," he said. "How do we protect a child from growing up surrounded by this scandal?" "The same way we've always protected royal children, with love, proper education, and gradual preparation for the responsibilities they'll inherit. This scandal will fade, Alexander. In 10 years, it will be historical footnote. But your child will still be your child, and Isabella will still be their mother." Before Alexander could respond, James Morrison entered the study carrying yet another folder of papers. His expression suggested the news was not good. "Your Highness, Your Majesty," James said with appropriate bows. "I apologize for interrupting, but there's been a new development. The person behind the blackmail attempts has been identified." Alexander gestured for James to continue, though he wasn't certain he could handle any more revelations. It was Marcus Rothwell, a former government minister who lost his position in a corruption scandal 2 years ago. Apparently, he had been a client of the Meridian Club and recognized Princess Isabella when your engagement was announced. He's been attempting to sell information about various public figures' connections to the club. The Queen Mother leaned forward with interest. Has he been arrested? Yes, Your Majesty. On charges of blackmail and extortion. His arrest has actually helped deflect some media attention from Princess Isabella specifically to the broader story of political corruption and the club's operations. Alexander felt a mixture of relief and continued anxiety. While the blackmail threat had been eliminated, the damage to his marriage and the monarchy's reputation remained significant. There's something else, James continued. Princess Isabella has requested a private audience with Your Highness. She says she has something important to discuss about her future with the royal family. Alexander looked at his grandmother, who nodded encouragingly. He had been avoiding substantive conversations with Isabella since the story broke, unsure of his own feelings and unwilling to make decisions while under intense public scrutiny. Send her in, Alexander said, though his heart rate increased with anticipation and dread. When Isabella entered the study, Alexander was struck by how much she had changed in just 3 weeks. The confident princess who had charmed foreign dignitaries and headed charitable organizations was gone, replaced by a woman who looked exhausted and emotionally drained. Her pregnancy was beginning to show, adding another layer of complexity to their situation. Your Majesty, Isabella said, curtsying formally to the Queen Mother before turning to Alexander. Your Highness. The formal address stung more than Alexander had expected. In private, Isabella had always called him by his given name, but the current crisis had apparently driven them back to official protocols even in intimate settings. Sit down, Isabella, the Queen Mother said kindly. Alexander tells me you have something important to discuss. Isabella perched on the edge of a chair, her posture suggesting she was prepared to flee if the conversation went badly. I've been thinking about what's best for everyone, for Alexander, for the monarchy, for our unborn child. I've reached a decision about my future. Alexander felt his chest tighten with apprehension. Isabella's tone suggested she had concluded their marriage was unsalvageable, which would create a constitutional crisis around divorce proceedings and custody arrangements for their child. I want to propose a trial separation, Isabella continued. Not divorce, but a formal period where I step back from royal duties while we determine whether our marriage can survive this crisis. I would move to my family's estate in America until after the baby is born, away from media attention and public scrutiny. The proposal caught Alexander completely off guard. He had expected either demands for reconciliation or requests for divorce, not a measured suggestion that would protect both their interests while providing time for healing. What about the baby? Alexander asked. The baby would be born in America, but raised to understand their royal heritage. If we ultimately reconcile, I would return to fulfill my duties as princess. If we divorce, our child would still be your heir but raised primarily in America with regular visits to England. The Queen Mother leaned back in her chair, clearly considering the implications of Isabella's proposal. It's an unconventional solution, she said finally, but it has precedent. Royal separations have occurred before during periods of crisis. Alexander realized that Isabella was offering him something he hadn't known. He wanted a space to process his feelings without the pressure of immediate decisions. The constant media attention had made genuine reconciliation impossible, but a trial separation might provide the distance needed for both of them to gain perspective. How long are you proposing for this separation? Alexander asked. 2 years, Isabella replied. Long enough for the scandal to fade, for our child to be born and their first year to be established, and for both of us to determine whether we can rebuild our marriage on a foundation of complete honesty. Alexander looked at his grandmother, who nodded almost imperceptibly. The proposal had obvious advantages from the monarchy's perspective. It would remove Isabella from public attention during the most intense period of scrutiny while keeping open the possibility of eventual reconciliation. There would need to be conditions, Alexander said slowly. Complete transparency about your activities during the separation. Regular communication about the pregnancy and our child's welfare. No public statements or interviews without prior approval. Agreed, Isabella said immediately. I don't want media attention, Alexander. I just want space to prove that the person I became because of loving you is real and lasting. The conversation continued for another hour as they worked through practical details with input from palace lawyers and constitutional experts. By the end, they had the framework for an arrangement that would satisfy legal requirements while providing both of them with the time and space needed to heal. As Isabella prepared to leave, she turned back to Alexander one final time. "I know you may never forgive me for the deception," she said quietly. "But I hope you'll remember that everything I did was because I loved you enough to risk everything for the chance to share your life." After Isabella left, Alexander remained in his study with his grandmother, both of them quiet as they contemplated the future. The scandal would continue for months, but the immediate crisis of their marriage had been addressed in a way that protected everyone's interests while leaving room for eventual resolution. "Do you think she's sincere?" Alexander asked his grandmother. "I think she's a woman who made difficult choices in impossible circumstances," the Queen Mother replied. "Whether those choices are forgivable is something only you can determine. But I will say this, the Isabella I've observed for the past 3 years has shown more genuine commitment to this family than many people born into it." Alexander nodded, understanding that his grandmother was offering perspective rather than advice. The decision about his marriage would ultimately be his to make, but at least now he would have time to make it thoughtfully rather than reactively. 2 weeks later, as Alexander watched Isabella's car disappear down the palace drive, he felt a complex mixture of loss and relief. The woman he had married was gone, but the hope for eventual reconciliation remained. Their child would be born into a world of privilege and scrutiny, but also into a family that had learned painful lessons about the importance of truth and the possibility of redemption. The scandal would fade, as his grandmother had predicted. But the changes it had brought to Alexander's understanding of love, trust, and the responsibilities of royal life would last forever. Whether those changes would ultimately strengthen or destroy his marriage remained to be seen, but, for the first time since the crisis began, he felt hopeful that the truth, however painful, might eventually set them all free. In his private moments, Alexander found himself thinking not about the woman Isabella had been before their marriage, but about the woman she might become during their separation. If she could prove that her transformation through love was genuine and lasting, perhaps their marriage could survive even this ultimate test of trust and forgiveness. Time, he realized, would tell whether love could indeed conquer the mistakes of the past and build a foundation strong enough to support their royal future.